I have to say that I've been an activist for as long as I can remember. Originally that was kind of like me on my own and my showing up, doing things. I think I marched with my parents when Dr. King came to Chicago. I was 10 years old. And by the time I was 14, I was going to women's rights rallies and skipping school. Stuff like that. So it's kind of what I've always done. But by the time I moved to New York City and started being a community activist around neighborhood issues, because my husband and I lived in Harlem at the time, that was very much a secular activity. It was neighborhood work. It was working with safety issues in a community that had been really ravaged by drugs. But it was an incredibly discouraging bit of work. It wasn't because the local people weren't committed. It wasn't even because the police were uncommitted, because at that time, New York City was still interested in community-based policing. So we had coalitions, we had block associations, we had patrols, we had all these things. But the larger political forces were so incredibly cynical. And we would make deals to do things, and then people would change their minds and just go on about their business. And I just, I was tired. But I had become a Unitarian Universalist when I got married. I was jokingly married into the faith. My husband is a lifelong Unitarian Universalist. And when I joined Community Church of New York, which is his family's church, I began to pay more attention to the life that I was developing as a religious leader in that congregation. I began to be active in the congregation, and then as I continued to do my community work, it began to occur to me that maybe the things I was learning in church would help me in the ways in which I was going to do community activism. So I began, I think, not even on a conscious level, to treat the work in my community as though I were doing church work, spending more time talking to people, hanging out with the neighbors I wasn't particularly fond of, but who knew everything about what was going on the block. And so by the time I began to do that, the work didn't become more effective. It was still difficult and largely discouraging, but I was not burnt and I was not discouraged. By the time I went to seminary, it was clear to me that rooting myself in Unitarian Universalist values was going to make a difference in whatever it was I was going to do. And so by the time I'd gotten out of school, gotten called to Fourth Universalist in New York City, it became clear that I could do both things and I needed to do both things. And it wasn't just with things like Occupy, but with the kinds of middle-class problems or first-world problems that you have in a community where your church is located on the Upper West Side, where people have lots of money, but there are also issues of quality of life that matter to them too. So that when the New York Historical Society wanted to build a 26-story tower across the street from the church that would block all the light for the entire block, and the neighborhood was up in arms and wanted to have some place to have a conversation, I opened the church for the community groups to talk. It was a little wild and woolly, and there were 500 people in the room, and it went on for 4 hours, but it was important to create that space for people to have a conversation together. And so neighbors who never talked to me before, who knew I was the minister of the church, but like, maybe what do you do at church? So they're like, eh. But after I opened the church, they started speaking to me on the street. Hi, Reverend, how you doing? Nice white middle-class people walking their dogs. I began to be a real person to them. And it really did shift how they began to work with us. And so by the time we were ready to have an Easter egg hunt on the street, you know, neighbors wanted to help and be part of that. That was what I wasn't able to do in the 13 years that I was there, was bring together the nice middle-class people who were kind of walking their dogs and knowing that I cared about, you know, the light that they got, and the Occupy people that I would host in the congregation, because on the first Monday of the month, that was Occupy Faith, and we would all gather in my sanctuary. That was the piece that I was trying to figure out how to bring together when I got called to California to serve at Starr King. But I would not be doing what I'm doing if I had not felt driven to unite the sacred and the social activism. So it's an honor to be heading a seminary that created the first master's program in the world that was based on helping people learn how to do sacred social change.